Welcome. Thanks for joining me. I'm going to get started, and I know people will be interrupting, but I like to start on time. I'm an old college professor, and that's what I did. So I'm happy to share with you the launch day of my new book, Tame Your Anxiety. It's hard to see because I have a sunlight here coming in. And I'm going to give you a very short introduction to the method that the book suggests and a couple of pitfalls involved, and then we'll take questions. And I also have questions that were written to me in advance that I'd like to address. So the simple answer. So if you were a gazelle and you were surrounded by lions and you panicked, you wouldn't live. So what do gazelles do to calm themselves, to tame their anxiety? And the simple answer is they focus on their next step. And that's the point of the book, is that focusing on your next step is what stimulates your happy chemicals and relieves your distress chemicals and relieves that feeling that you are not able to meet your needs. So that's all your inner mammal is looking for, is the feeling that, yes, I can meet my needs, I'm going to survive. So how to do this, I suggest, is a simple tool in 3 steps that will only take you 22 minutes. And I'll do the steps and then I'll go into them in more detail. The first step, very simply, is in 1 minute, and I suggest using a timer. In 1 minute, ask yourself, what is it I need or want in this moment? And if it were a real emergency, this is when you would get to say, well, I don't want to do this exercise, I want to call 911. But most of the time you will decide that it's not a real emergency, but that you have needs. And when you listen to your real needs, that helps your inner mammal feel safe, because it feels like its needs will be met, rather than telling yourself you shouldn't want that, you shouldn't care about that. This is a way of saying, I am going to attend to my own needs. Now, I explain that we can understand our needs as dopamine needs, serotonin needs, oxytocin needs. So, for example, oxytocin need is that familiar acceptance and belonging, if you've read my other books. Serotonin need is the natural urge for social importance. And although it sounds wrong and it sounds like other people do that, but I'm above all that, is we all have an urge for specialness. It's natural, it's healthy. We can't control the world, so you can't be the ruler of the world every minute. And so it's hard to find ways to meet that need, and yet it is a real need. And when we acknowledge it and we step toward it, it really does relieve anxiety. And finally, dopamine. Dopamine is the urge for, very frankly, is new and improved. So in the state of nature, when food was not easily available, you had to look constantly for food. When you found new food and better food, was like a huge excitement because it met a real need. In the modern world, when you have a full belly, it's a little harder to stimulate that sense of excitement. And there are, of course, we know, unhealthy ways of stimulating it. And so then when you try to get away from the unhealthy needs, then you may get away from dopamine altogether. So we all look for some way of bringing that sense of excitement and new rewards into our life. And again, you don't have absolute power over it. You can't control the world all the time, but you can take little steps towards stimulating more dopamine. And that's all it takes to stimulate it, is little steps. And then you start feeling good instead of feeling bad. Now, that's step 1, is what is it that I need right now? And of course, we want everything, but we can't get everything at once. So it's figuring out, right now, my anxiety is about what real need. Now, the second step is do something fun for 20 minutes to give your cortisol time to dissipate. Now, cortisol, as you probably know from my other books, cortisol is that ancient chemical that triggers the survival threat feeling. And when a gazelle smells a predator, cortisol tells it to look for, where is the predator? Where is the escape route? Gathering information. So when we start to feel anxious, It tells your cortex to gather information about the threat. And you can end up gathering information about threats all the time. And when you get more threat signals, then you trigger more cortisol and you look for more threat signals and you're in a bad loop. So if you try to solve your problems while your cortisol is surging, you may just think every possible solution looks awful. So you want to give your cortisol time to dissipate before you judge solutions. And how do you get it to dissipate? Cortisol has a half-life of 20 minutes. So if you do something fun for 20 minutes, you will metabolize and excrete half of it. If you do something fun for 40 minutes, you'll get rid of half of what's left, which is 75% of it. And if you go on to the hour, then you'll get rid of, almost all of it. So what can you do for 20 minutes that's not going to trigger more cortisol? So that's hard to do, especially in a moment of panic. So the book talks about a lot of options. Sure, everyone can think of a negative option that's not good for you in the long run. And interestingly, that sort of gets people into a bad loop, because you do that bad behavior, then your cortex says, oh, what's going to happen to me in the long run if I keep doing this? And then you feel bad, so then you want that bad habit even more. So the book suggests a lot of alternative things that you can do to feel good for 20 minutes or 40 minutes, and ways of making them portable, so they're always accessible to you in your various situations of life. Now, let me address some of the more common suggestions and go deeper into this. Many people are told, well, when you're feeling bad, you should do yoga. But if you do yoga and you just hate it, then don't do that when you're feeling bad. If you do yoga and you're criticizing your body or you're criticizing your skill, then yoga is not the thing for you. So, what about the famous walk in the park? Well, that's good if it works for you. But you could be a person who, while you're having your walk in the park, you're just replaying negative conversations in your brain. And so that doesn't work for you. So the idea is to do something that keeps your mind busy so it doesn't stimulate more cortisol, but also preferably keep your body busy, because using your body and your mind together is very absorbing and helps you get into a positive space so that you don't, again, release more cortisol. I enjoy cooking. I enjoy watching comedy videos, and I enjoy watching videos in foreign language because that keeps my brain so busy that I can't worry while I'm watching them. And then I will often do exercise, stretching and things while I'm watching the videos. So you can design something that fits you. It doesn't have to be on that good for you list. Because this is not the moment for that. You can do that some other time. So 20 to 40 minutes, and then you don't want to keep with the distraction forever. You want to move on to your last step, which is taking action. Taking a step toward meeting your needs in 60 seconds. Now, of course, you can think, what can I do in 60 seconds? Well, in 60 seconds, you're going to initiate action, which means you're going to come to a conclusion. And if you can't start it right now, then you're going to write on your calendar and hopefully do it by the end of the day. Now, the reason it's 60 seconds is because you could spend the rest of your life debating the best course of action and then never take any action. And imagine how a gazelle would feel if it had these different escape routes in front of it, and it just debated which was the best one, and debated, and then the lion's getting closer and closer. So that's the way you feel when you can't choose a course of action. So if you set a timer, give yourself 60 seconds, you only need to take a small step by the end of the day, and then tomorrow you could take another small step. So small steps are all it takes to stimulate our happy chemicals, and they're what it takes to meet your needs and solve your problems. you can't necessarily change the world today, but you don't need to change the world to relieve your anxiety. If you think that's the solution, well, I guess that brings us to the pitfalls section of my talk. So before I get to questions, I'm going to talk about some of the pitfalls in putting this strategy to action. So you have these 3 steps, and what I suggest, I call it digging the well before you need the water, which means doing this practice every day so that it feels more natural and normal when you're in a bad place or a moment of panic. So get your timer, do your 22 minutes, take your step, and feel good about it. And know that you always get to take another step. But even in this context, and you think it's hard, let's talk about some of the complications around it. So the big one I need to address is our mortality. So I'm going to die, you're going to die, all my loved ones are going to die. And this is the core source of our anxiety. And sometimes it's just better to be honest about it, because that helps you put into perspective if you're getting very upset about something very small. Like my famous one is when I'm supposed to do something on some website. You're supposed to, register and do something, and I try, and it doesn't accept my password, doesn't accept my credit card, whatever I'm trying to do doesn't work, and I have no idea why. And I get really upset because I thought this was a 1-minute task, and now a half hour has gone by and I haven't gotten a thing done. So, when you pull back and you say, in the long run, my life will be better if I don't get upset about this. I don't have an unlimited amount of time. How can I best use that time? And then I reframe my thinking. So our anxiety is always in the context of our mortality. Now, how did people relieve their anxiety threats? Their mortality fears. For most of human history, people had, of course, they had spiritual beliefs, but more important, they had grandchildren. And they started having children very young. So if you reached 40, you probably had grandchildren, and you would teach them your traditions, and you would see your traditions surviving in them. And that triggered the good feeling of survival in your brain. And so you weren't always panicking about your own death because you had some illusions about living on. And this is what people are looking for now, is illusions about living on. And we have a modern word for that, which is called legacy. So people look for some way of creating legacy, and that soothes your anxiety because you have that sense of survival that your inner mammal is so urgently looking for. So how do you create a legacy? Well, many ways of doing it. You just get upset because you say, I want to change the world, but the world is bad, so now I have more cortisol than ever. So this is a very common loop today, and so we can be more practical about creating a legacy rather than having these illusions about changing the world. Read history. The world has always been full of mammals. It's full of mammals today. Deal with it. So how can I create a legacy? So let's say I used some girl examples in my sessions this morning, so I'm going to use a boy example now. Excuse me. Let's say that you were doing some sport when you were young, and now you have a grandchild and you want to teach that grandchild your skill in that sport. And your grandchild is not interested, couldn't care less, or possibly even disrespectful. And you may feel it's like an attack on your survival, because it's not really that they're attacking your survival. That's how you were meeting your sense of survival needs in your brain. So you need to find an alternative way to pass on your knowledge about this sport and your learning experience to others, instead of seeing that grandchild as the gatekeeper. So instead of treating other people as gatekeepers, we can always find creative new ways to build our legacy. And when you do that, then any obstacle to your legacy, that feels like a survival threat, and that triggers more anxiety. But then you can get honest with yourself and say, okay, my inner mammal really cares about survival. I'm frustrated by the obstacle to my legacy, but I can get creative instead of treating people as gatekeepers and find some alternative way of building my legacy. Now, next potential pitfall is, so this is a very tough one to address because some people get offended, but anxiety is learned. The brain always learns from what gets rewarded, and some people get rewarded for anxiety. Parents of goodwill may be rewarding their children for anxiety. Teachers with the best intentions may be rewarding students for anxiety. And because the brain learns from whatever gets rewarded, you may have learned that anxiety will get you a reward. And when you do that, it's not that you're consciously being manipulative, but what you're doing is finding that sense of having a reward in the way that you got it before. And everyone does this. So if you are rewarded for anxiety, it's really hard, but you can redirect yourself into a new circuit. You have to build the new circuit. It takes a lot of repetition in adulthood, but the important thing, and this is explained in my book, you can build an exit ramp between the old neural pathway and your new highway that you're building, so that instead of being stuck on your old highway, that you exit into the positive new way of getting your needs met rather than the way that worked when you were young. Now, the third potential pitfall that I want to talk about is social comparison. Our brain is designed to make social comparisons. As shocking as that is, animals are constantly comparing themselves to others, and they release a threatened feeling when they see that they're in the one down position. Because if I grab for a banana when a stronger monkey is near me, they may bite me, and a bite is cortisol, is pain, builds a big cortisol circuit. And the next time I see that bigger monkey, the cortisol motivates me to withdraw. And when I withdraw, I'm not going to get the banana, but it makes me feel safer. So that social comparison pathway is stimulating a lot of cortisol in people because they're seeing themselves in the one down position, and they're seeing it as a survival threat, even though they don't consciously think that. Now, if I told you not to compare yourself to others, you would do it anyway because that's what the mammal brain does. So instead, we can learn to be more conscious of when we're doing it so that we realize that we're doing it ourselves instead of feeling like other people are doing it to us. When I know that I'm keeping score, I'm creating these comparison feelings, and I think they are judging me because I'm judging myself. So that's the first step. The second step is to say, I can focus on my strengths rather than my weaknesses. So the monkey way of doing that is to say, I'm going to find a banana near an individual who's weaker than me rather than the banana near the individual who's stronger than me. Now that may sound very rude, and you may think, oh, I could never do that, and only bad people do that. But the bottom line is, if you always focus on how you're in the one down position, you're going to feel bad, and you're going to be causing that feeling yourself. If you put yourself in the one up position, you can find compassionate and kind ways of doing that, which is mostly to keep it to yourself, but to focus on your strengths rather than your weaknesses. And I have a really funny example, and this is in the book. So I have this girlfriend, and she has a really thin waist. And when I see her, like, my eyes immediately go to her waist because my waist is quite thick. Now, it so happens that she has very thin hair, and when she sees me, her eyes immediately go to my hair, which is very thick. So we're both creating bad feelings in ourselves by focusing on our weaknesses. So what would happen if every time we saw each other that I focused on my hair and she focused on her waist? Well, then you might say, well, that's showing off, that's being pompous. But the bottom line is, I could just do that for a split second and then move on, is to say, I don't need to take inventory all the time. I'm with this person, let's have a good time. But if your first response is to take inventory, you have to get yourself out of that negative comparison and into a more positive comparison. Now, that can be hard to do for some people. For most people, I think it's hard to do. If you grew up with, let's say you had relatives who were doing better than you, so you always feel like you're in the one down position. But what if you had relatives who are doing worse than you? Then they guilt you for feeling in the one up position. So there's no easy answer. We're all mammals. We're all in the same boat. So it doesn't really help to think, well, I have it hard. I got a bad life. I got a bad brain. This is hard for everyone. But the second you start noticing that you've created that social comparison inventory yourself, it just feels less threatening, and you can focus more on your positive chemistry. So now, happy to go to questions. And I will start with a question that was written to me. And I actually hear this question very, very, very often. So a person says that they have been diagnosed as the such and such type. So you can think about whatever type that you're hearing about these days that rings true for you. But the whole idea of personality type is getting a lot of attention. And when people say that they're a certain type, then they're told that certain things are harder for them. And then they identify with this, and then they end up feeling bad. Like, I have not been able to do something because I'm this type, and so on. Now I'm stuck in this bad world. So that doesn't help you at all. So we're much better off thinking everyone has these certain challenges. Everyone has different challenges, but no one can have all the happy chemicals all the time. So we're all making decisions about where we invest our energy. And every minute, with every step, you get to make that decision again. So it's good if we think of the sort of the universal type human, which wants dopamine. But then when you go for the dopamine, you might lose your oxytocin or your serotonin, or you might get more cortisol. So what do? That's challenging, but we're all in the same boat, and the answer is always to take that next step toward meeting your needs rather than saying, I can't do it because I'm a certain type. Now, if identifying with that type is helping you, if you are saying, it's harder for me to take this step and therefore I'm going to work harder at it, break it down into small chunks, and repeatedly train myself to take those steps and build that new pathway, then that's great. But a lot of people are using this self-categorizing in ways that are not helping them. And I'll give you the funniest example. Like, in my many years as a college professor, I can't tell you how many people came to my office and said, well, tests are so unfair because my roommate didn't study and he got a good grade and I didn't get a good grade. And so it's that idea that somebody else is doing it effortlessly and I'm not. And when you make that comparison, you don't have all the facts. You don't know how hard that person really studied. You don't know how many years and hours they invested to understand this material in the past in order to process it more easily today. You don't know whether you think you studied a longer time, but you were really distracting yourself and not really studying. And so what if you have to study longer than them? You can still take that step and reach your goals. So in my opinion, that typologizing isn't very useful. Now, this typologizing brings us to disease labels, such as being diagnosed with this label or that label. And once again, if this is working for you, fine, go for it. Not criticizing it, but it has some serious drawbacks, and so it doesn't work for a lot of people. And so I'll explain that a little bit. Now, a lot of people try to get diagnosed with something so that they get free treatment, and also because it feels great to think that a doctor can fix your problems the way you can just bring your car to the shop and get fixed. You wish you could just bring your brain to the shop, and you shouldn't touch it yourself, but you got to let the expert handle it. Well, that would be lovely if doctors could do that. And I'm not criticizing doctors or healthcare practitioners, because they do deal with serious emergencies that we have trouble addressing in our homes. But there are limitations to the solutions that they have. And I'll give you some examples of the limitations. If you get a pill, so the first thing is, when you think the pill solves your problem, you don't focus on the steps you need to take to build the new circuits. You're free to do that, and the doctor wants you to do that. But if you're telling yourself that the pill will solve the problem, you're not building the circuit to have healthier behaviors and healthier thought habits. And so you're just leaving it all to the pill. And what's going to happen is, even if the pill works in the short run, there's likely to be a time when your brain habituates to this medication and it no longer has its effect. And so then what happens? Either you need a higher dose or different medication, and you end up taking more and having more side effects. And then you have not only more obstacles, but you probably get more medication to deal with the side effects. And in the long run, many people have found that their brain feels like mush from all these pills and habituation and lack of skill building. So then what? Then they decide they want to get off the pills, and some people get off them easily, and that's fabulous. I'm happy for you. But other people have found that their brain has adjusted to the pills, and then they have trouble getting off them. So it's useful to know that building your own skills for taking those steps that make you feel safe is really the core of life, and is the essential survival reliever. And medical treatment, either it's temporary or it's supposed to be help, but what is it helping you do? It needs to help you do what I just said, is find your confidence in your own skills so you can take steps to meet your survival needs, because that stimulates your happy chemicals. So help helps when it does that, and help doesn't help when you think of it as just bringing your brain to the shop and expecting a part to get replaced and fixed. They don't have that. They are not likely to have that. And if they've led you to believe that they have that, you have to say that you led yourself to believe that, because it is attractive, and you can just change your mind and tell yourself that that's not really what they were promising. They really are just helping you build confidence in your own brain management power. Okay, next question. So I had a question about serious medical challenges. So it's hard enough to manage anxiety when things are sort of normal. But either if you have a serious medical challenge, or someone you know has a potentially life-threatening medical challenge, so how do you relieve your anxiety then? So let's start with, if you are the patient, So the first thing is it's nice to sort of accept your inner mammal, which means accepting that it's natural to feel anxiety rather than judging yourself for it. Because if you judge yourself for it, then you're only going to sort of feel worse and go into a spiral. So how can you then get out of this anxiety feeling is give yourself things that make you feel good. And there's limited things you can do because what feels good compared to this horrible medical situation? It's limited, but even within that limited list, many people deny themselves things on the list. So give yourself things that make you feel good. And one of them is legacy building. And another, I think, is comedy, is something funny. And another is doing something creative with your hands. Now, if you are the caretaker or loved one of someone with an illness, in addition to all that, let's talk a little about guilt. You may think that it's wrong for you to feel good while that person is in that terrible situation. So instead, you have to remind yourself, like the old cliche about turning on your oxygen mask first before you can help others, that it's okay to feel positive even when someone else is hurting, because your positive feelings give you more strength to contribute whatever it is that you can contribute. And a simple reminder is that the word empathy, the M part means from the outside. So empathy means feeling something from the outside. You are not obligated to go inside that feeling with them and share their pain. And you may think you're obligated to do that, but it's not the case. So next, let's talk about procrastination. Yes, I got a question about procrastination. So someone asks, I want to take steps, but every time I think of doing it, I don't, and then I just find myself spending more and more time with distractions. So we often dream of taking big steps, and then we don't take any steps. So one strategy is to chunk down and take smaller steps that we can manage and know that you always have a chance to take another step and another. Another strategy is to notice the negative expectations that you're associating with taking that step. If I take the step now, you may think, I'm going to blow it and I'm going to ruin my big chance. So then you just need to tell yourself, it's not just one chance you have. You're going to have a lot of little chances, and each step you take, you're going to learn more from it. So keep taking small steps. The more you step, the more you learn. Don't wait for some big perfect step. And finally, many people feel like if I take this big step, other people are going to criticize me. And either they're going to say, how dare you think you're so important that you could do that? Or they may tell you that you're doing it the wrong way. So whatever it is, you can just focus on your own rewards for your own steps and not feel that you need that applause or support from others. Now, so many advice mongers tell you to get support from others, and then you feel like something's wrong if you don't have it. I have to tell you, I haven't hardly gotten any support at all. Like when I have these ideas, people tell me, what's that inner mammal stuff? That sounds stupid. And I couldn't get it out of my head. I just feels like the truth to me. And I cared more about focusing on my own truth than helping other people think I'm smart, because they don't know better than me. So I have this great hobby that may help you with this. I like to read biographies, and I also like movies and TV about biographies. And I have learned that most of the people that we've heard of today had a really hard time in their lives. You don't have to see them as a victim, but they didn't get celebrations and applause for every step. Often they didn't get any appreciation at all during their lifetime. And if they did, then what they got was often with a lot of attacks come with it when you get attention. And more interesting, a lot of them had really awful early childhoods compared to the idealized nurturing that therapists have suggested today. So, for example, Thomas Edison went to work when he was 11 years old. Um, uh, Alexander Hamilton went to work when he was 14 years old. Andrew Carnegie and Charles Dickens. Not only did they have to work when they were young, but then their parents took the money. So they had to support their parents. So this was rather common in the past, and these people learned valuable life skills. So it doesn't really help you to feel bad about not having had some idealized nurturing. What I always explain is, think of a person who had what you think was like the support you wish you want, where their parents applauded for them every minute and their mother cut their meat when they were 10 years old. Like, that person's not going to have better survival skills. So it doesn't really benefit you to keep score about your childhood and your past. You're better off just focusing on, what does it take to meet my needs now? How can I build confidence and take that next step? Now, a really interesting example of this, it's hard to have that confidence because we are all born helpless and vulnerable. And the first circuit in every brain is that feeling that I am desperately needy and can't do a thing about it. Because that's basically what it is to be an infant. You're hungry and you have no way to get food, and you don't even know what food is. So you cry and people come and then they go and you can't control them. So that's the core state of every one of us. And since our brain wires from early experience, that's the experience where we've wired in, and that's what we're likely to repeat if we try to keep meeting our needs in the way defined by our child circuits. So on some level, we need to distinguish our early circuits from adult reality. So adult reality is, I want to be protected. It's natural to want to be protected. Every mammal looks for protection. But I have to give myself the protection. I have to give myself the feeling of being protected. For example, you could say a gazelle wants the protection of the herd, but they really invest a lot of energy getting the protection of the herd. They have to constantly watch, where is the herd? They have to follow the herd when it moves away, even though they'd rather stick here and eat grass. They have to run when the herd runs, even if it's a false alarm. Being with the herd means their horns are poking you and their hooves are poking you. So there's a price you pay to get protection from others. And in the monkey world, it can get even more complicated because monkeys have to groom each other. They don't always get a grooming back. So we want protection, but we only have so much energy. So we have to decide, how much energy do we want to invest in getting others to protect us versus how much energy do we want protecting ourselves? And when it's protecting myself, how much am I protecting myself from a real threat versus how much am I feeling the need for protection because it's an imagined threat and I can relieve it by becoming aware of it? Now, how do I become aware of that I'm creating my own threat? And it starts with understanding the neural pathways built from my unique past experience. So each one of us had cortisol experiences in our youth that built circuits that tell us, you're in danger because you were in danger in that moment. Now, for one person, it might have been a very horrific experience, and another person, it may have been not getting invited to a party. So whatever it is, that circuit is always going to be there triggering your cortisol. So let's say you weren't invited to a party and you saw two people laughing and you thought, oh, they're talking about the party and I'm not invited and they're all going to have a good time without me, let's just say. Now, when you think that, you build the circuit and then you go through the rest of your life, every time you see two people laughing, you think, I'm left out, or they're laughing about me, and you give yourself that bad feeling, and you could see people laughing together 10 times a day. And then you could say that you're traumatized because you're constantly giving yourself this bad feeling and you have this real physical circuit, but you can have an alternative. What do you want? Do you want to go to a party? Do you want to make friends with people so that you can go to parties or have your own party, or you don't really care that much about parties? So you can just focus your brain on the rewards that are meaningful to you and the steps you need to get there, and that will build new pathways. So you will take the exit ramp out of the old pathway into the new one. Now, let's say that your early experience was something very, very damaging, and you don't have the positive pathways that you wish you would have. So a useful way of looking at this is just taking one step will trigger a positive feeling, and that paves the pathway, and then you take one more step and that builds a positive pathway. So no matter how bad your life, that's just one circuit in your brain. You have billions of other neural pathways that you can connect into new circuits. It's harder to do after puberty because we're past our peak neuroplasticity, but with repetition, you can do it, and it helps to focus specifically on the new pathway you want, because then you're sure you're going to repeat the same one. Well, our time is about up, and I want to mention that I'm going to be doing this again 4 weeks from today so that you have time to read Tame Your Anxiety, and therefore you'll be able to ask me questions based on the book. So I'd love to hear your questions, and I will have more discussion about that when on 4 weeks from today, June 5th, same time, same place. So thank you so much. Bye-bye.